I'd just like to acknowledge and appreciate the efforts of Jeannie Chang and Jiwan Lee, who are both doctoral students at Loyola who are helping us run this webinar. My name is Matt Miller. I am a program director at the Counseling Psychology program at Loyola University Chicago, and I have been a professor in the field for, I think, maybe 18 years. I don't know, Alex, is it 18 years for us? So a couple years.
At least.
At least, right? It feels like 36, but it might just be 18. So I'm very happy to be with you this evening. I will pass it along to my colleague, Dr. Lewis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Chione Lewis. I use she, her pronouns. I am an associate professor and co-director of training of the Counseling Psychology program at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm also the vice president for education and training for the Society of Counseling Psychology, which is Division 17 of the American Psychological Association. So happy to have you all joining us today. Should we also share a little bit about our research in our labs? Okay.
Yes, I forgot.
So my research is also focused on exploring the impact of racism and sexism on the health and well-being of women of color, with a specific focus on Black women. I'm also really interested in how women of color engage in resistance and radical healing against oppression. And I'm the director of the Gender and Racial Health Disparities Research Team, and I will be reviewing applications for fall 2024. So looking forward to engaging in conversation with you all today. I will pass it over to Dr. Flores.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name's Lisa Flores. I'm a professor of psychology and associate chair for diversity and inclusion in the Department of Psychological Sciences at the University of Missouri. I'm starting my 21st year on faculty at Mizzou and had maybe 2 or 3 years at another institution before coming here. I think one way in which I'm a little bit different from the other panelists is I'm currently affiliated with a clinical psych program. So this is my 3rd year in a clinical psych program. I've admitted one student in the last 2 years who really is very strongly counseling leaning. So my research has focused on understanding cultural, environmental factors that contribute to the career decision-making, educational goals of Latinx individuals. And in the past 15 years, I've focused on Latinx individuals who are pursuing STEM careers. So very happy to be here this evening and look forward to our discussion as well. I will pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Petersi.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Good evening, everybody. So glad that you are with us. My name is Alex Petersi. I'm an associate professor, counseling psychology at Boston College. I'm also the director for the Institute for the Study of Race and Culture at BC. My areas of research are broadly focused on race-related variables, racism, anti-racism. And happy for anybody to reach out to speak a little more about that. I will say part of the reason I'm so excited about this webinar is that I think, especially for folk of color, it's an exciting time to be thinking about entering psychology, because we are grappling with the history of racism in psychology, how we can respond to that. Division 17 has been very active in thinking about how professional associations can really challenge racism. So it's a really exciting time, and we need your involvement in that discussion. So very excited to have all of you interested in these programs.
I've had the privilege of knowing the panelists for several years. And it's, one of the fond memories I have first meeting Alex years ago was just noticing how when I speak, some people will pay attention. And then when Alex's wonderful thoughts and voice come out, people like stop and pause and pay attention. And I just observed that on my screen here, which was awesome. I forgot to share my research and professional interests. I study racism, and I'm trying to imagine ways that are real world ways that we can help people cope with, survive, and thrive in the face of racism. And so, along with Jeannie and Jiwon, who are excellent members of my research group, we work together on Spoken Project and trying to create video-based kind of efforts to support that work. And I'm really excited about tonight. I'm usually not excited about meetings, but I've been looking forward to this one for several days. And I think there will be great information, but I also think that we're going to have a great shared experience. And I think that's maybe one of the most important things you consider as you think about a counseling psychology program is finding your people, finding your community. And it's possible that those people are here right now, which I think is really cool. I'm going to the older I get a little cheesier. I'm going to do something right now for those of you on my screen, if it's okay. If you can keep your camera on, you can turn it off if you don't want to do this. I'm going to take a screenshot of the group if you want to like say hi or wave, but I'm going to do that right now just for my own memory. Maybe we'll share this with the video post, but feel free to look away. But 3, 2, 1. All right. And then the other thing we're going to do now is we're going to invite people. So we have a lot of people here, and what we're trying to have an equitable process for answering questions. Now, we had a number of questions submitted during the registration process. We have those on a separate document that we'll reference. We also want to give you a chance to offer your questions now. And in an equitable manner, I think what we'll do is we're going to ask people to, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat. We won't be able to monitor the hand raising in Zoom. So if you have a question, please enter it in chat, and Jeannie and Jiwon and the panelists will be monitoring that. And what we're going to do is we have way more questions that we can answer. But Jean or Jiwon, can you put in the shared online resources right now? So a lot of the questions we received about 40 or so questions. And a lot of the questions that we were asked, we believe that we found some resources either specific to BIPOC student experiences or general application to psychology programs or counseling psychology programs. We're going to share those links now. We'll reshare them at the end of the webinar. And we really encourage you to go to these links. There are a lot of step-by-step directions and guidance from the start of the search for applying to a PhD program in counseling psychology to interviewing. So a lot of that general information is there. As well as some of those links are for specific resources for BIPOC students who are interested. So all that being said, we're going to now move to some questions, and we've got about 45 minutes left. And so we're going to start with a couple pre-selected questions, and then we'll move to any questions that are offered in real time. One of the questions that was asked during registration was, how can I ensure that I will be supported in my time in a program? How can I make sure I am represented? Any of the panelists want to answer that one?
I will jump in and say that a good way to start is to just start researching who is on faculty within the program. And if any faculty have lab websites, who their students are. If you can connect with a current graduate student in the program already, you can ask questions about diversity and representation and climate. I think so websites are great for doing some initial research, but they only tell a very small portion of the story, right? Anybody can put anything up on their websites, and most programs kind of know what language to put in order to be appealing, to draw attention from prospective applicants. The ones that are really you're going to get the tea from the current graduate students. Particularly students of color, students who share similar backgrounds or identities as you, are going to be open and honest and transparent about what their experiences are there. Listen to what the students are saying, and try to connect with them. I think most of them are happy to be able to connect with you privately and share their experiences with you.
I'll also chime in. I think, in addition to what Dr. Flores said, also just thinking about trying to select a program where there's not just only one faculty member that's doing the kind of work you're most interested in. Ideally, at least being at a place where there's more than one faculty member doing research that you're interested in would be good, because if a faculty member leaves or goes on sabbatical or has or any other kind of experience, you then aren't just left there, right? So having a place where there's multiple faculty doing the research you're interested in, seeing that there's representation for, diverse representation of the student population is also important. And then also thinking about the location and where you're actually going to be. I think that is important as well. There are lots of really great programs that are in a range of locations in terms of the sociopolitical climate. And so be thinking about those things too, because it's a place you're going to be for about 5 years of your life. And so you want it to be in at least a city and place that you feel like you can live, and where you will feel affirmed and supported in your identities, going about your daily life. So, you're not just a student in that place. You also need to live there for a period of time. It's a pivotal period of time for all kinds of other things. So just be thinking about that as well.
We had another question. How can students with DACA go about looking for funding for a program they are interested in? Lisa?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on here. So I am a member of the National Latinx Psychological Association, and I reached out to a couple of colleagues earlier today to get some information about this. I'm going to share some links on chat that they provided that include some additional resources for students in this situation to learn more about it. The situation is going to vary state by state and university by university. So one of the things that you will want to do is just research because each state then sets their own legislation on whether they recognize DACA students. And so you want to do some research on that, and then also do some research on the universities that you're interested in attending, on what sort of programs or services are provided through that university for DACA students. Some universities have offices that are the undocu centers, or something similar to that universities will have to support DACA students. The other thing maybe is to look for and ask faculty or students about support for DACA students within the program. If they have a history of previous DACA students, sometimes programs can get creative in terms of the types of resources or the types of financial support that may not be readily available for DACA students. They have figured out ways that they can work around some of those. So somebody had mentioned that one way is on federal grants, listing DACA students as contractors as a way to be able to support them as research assistants on some grants. So there are different ways. I'm going to provide a link, as I had mentioned, to some online resources that you can explore a little bit more that have been provided and written by graduate students with DACA status, who are kind of sharing their experiences and some of the resources that they located. But it's going to really vary by university, and it's going to vary by the state and what their regulations are around recognizing and supporting, providing resources for DACA students.
I just realized that some folks might not know that there are these different. So for folks who might not know, there are different ethnic minority psychological associations. So Dr. Flores just mentioned the National Latinx Psychological Association. There's the Association of Black Psychologists. There's the Asian American Psychological Association. There's a Society of Indian Psychologists. So also looking to those websites for resources and information. And if you haven't been exposed to those areas of the field, definitely encourage you to look there, think about ways to get involved, because each of these different cultural ethnic minority psychological associations exist and have a really long, strong history of providing very strength-based work about our communities. And so definitely those are other important resources and ways you can connect with other folks of color based on your own background. Just wanted to put that plug in.
That was a great point, and that's something I should have put on these resources. I was texting, but I'll just ask Jeannie and Jiwon, can you look those up? AAPA, NLPA, ABPSI, SIP, Society of Indian Psychologists, and AminaPsi. I'll text you that too, but if you can look those up and put those association websites in the chat, that is a great resource.
Matt, a couple of thoughts just to go back to the initial question. Part of the reason we had spoken about putting up this webinar, and thanks again, Matt, for suggesting it, was simply that, and this is no surprise, but I'm going to say the academy remains a very white space. And so for students of color, often part of their experience is negotiating that white space, and a space sometimes in which they don't readily see themselves represented. So I cannot underscore enough something that Lisa said. Speak to the students in the program. Speak to as many people as you can. Speak to the training directors. As a training director, if someone reached out to me, an applicant with a specific question, how does your program support students of color? I'm excited. The training director who is not excited about that question, maybe that's not the program you are interested in. So really talk to as many people you can, people outside of the program. Just get a sense, will I be seen? Will I be appreciated? Will I be valued? Really, really important.
And panelists, and again, a reminder, if you have questions in the audience, feel free to enter those in the chat. Oh, I see one through the Q&A. Okay, and we did receive a number of questions, some of this in panelists. I'll answer this one in panelists if you want to find another question. But there were a number of questions about funding for the PhD, whether taking interest-based loans is possible or not. As you're researching programs, I think it's several programs. There is a list in that resource of all of the counseling psychology programs, the accredited counseling psychology programs in North America, and many of them are going to offer some level of funding. I know that at all of the programs represented here, there's some level of funding that fluctuates. Maybe each of us could talk about what that is. So at Loyola, we typically admit about 3 students with a 3-year funding package that includes tuition, stipend, and healthcare. Those are research assistant or teaching assistants. And again, so that covers, the stipends aren't great in terms of real world expenses, but those would provide some base level of funding. Who else wants to share about your program funding?
At Boston College, we have a similar setup, Matt. We provide 4 years of funding, which is through graduate assistantships. The assistantships covers the tuition. I believe we just recently had a bump in our stipend, so it's currently at $28,000, which I understand living in Boston is not. But there is some support there. You can sometimes funding also comes through faculties who are doing grant-driven research. You can get written into a grant, but the kind of basic funding is assistantship, which covers tuition and then has a stipend, and then health insurance, which gets included with that because that's attached to the assistantship.
Were you going to chime in, Lisa?
Yeah, just because I think this is such an important, it might be good for all of us to address this because it's such a critical issue. I know when I went to when I was applying for graduate school many years ago, but financial support was at the top of my list in terms of programs that I was considering, because I had to support myself. I didn't have a family that could help fund and support my time during graduate school. So funding is going to vary by university, by department, by program. I am currently in a psych department, and I think most psych departments tend to have pretty solid and strong funding, but most counseling psych programs are not in psychology departments. So that's something to think about. But here in the psych department here, we guarantee all graduate students and all programs get 5 years guaranteed funding at 20 hours, 50%. And that also includes tuition remission and healthcare subsidies. And that funding can include serving as an RA on faculty grants or serving as a TA for courses in the department.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. Ours is very similar at Maryland. We're a joint program across the College of Education and Department of Psychology. And so students are admitted into one side of the program or the other based on the faculty member they want to work with. And so there are slight differences in our funding packages, depending on if you come in on the psychology side or if you come in on the education side. But anywhere from 3 to 5 years of funding is guaranteed. But many of our students also, even if they don't have a full 5 years of funding, they are able to find assistantships across campus, working at, the Career Center, the Counseling Center, different assistantships like that. And it does come with tuition and fees. And so it's a very similar kind of structure. And ours is about I think it's a little over 30,000. It's higher. There was some recent increases. I was just trying to look at the exact numbers from last year. It was anywhere between $30,000 to $35,000. But the DMV area is also pretty expensive too. So, I think a lot of the funding packages are similar, but I also want to encourage students to also look into other external funding opportunities as well. So the APA Minority Fellowship Program has a predoctoral fellowship that also will then supplement and provide additional funds for you for over the course of, I think it's 4 years of your graduate program. There is a health policy research scholars program through Robert Wood Johnson that one of my doctoral students just got that gives, I think, additional like $30,000 a year for 4 years. Is a really good fellowship opportunity. So I encourage you all to look into that. Ford Foundation Predoctoral Fellowship. There's lots of other fellowship. Oh, that one's phasing out. But there's a lot of other funding mechanisms that are really looking for underrepresented students, particularly students who want to go on to pursue faculty positions and kind of to diversify the professorate as well. So lots of different opportunities for funding.
And most universities also have fellowship programs that are offered to incoming graduate students. So ask about what the fellowship opportunities are, if that's something you can apply to, or if you have to be nominated for by the program faculty. So there are also internal fellowships that you could also potentially compete for and apply for at the universities that you're admitted to.
The links that we shared, the association as well as all those other links will have ideas about funding as well. Each of the APA, the APA.org website will have a lot of external links as well. We're going to shift to a question here that is kind of lumped together. How do you reach out to potential advisors or mentors for a program? Any panelists have some suggestions, or what do you think is a strategy to consider?
I mean, I can jump in. I think I might have a more non-traditional take on this particular question, but I'm also seeing some other questions that I might try to incorporate in my response. So I think a lot of students get the advice that it's really important to reach out to somebody you're interested in working with and email them and send them your CV and kind of do this kind of thing. But often faculty get a lot of those types of emails, and some faculty can't possibly individually meet with every student who's interested. And it doesn't mean that they're not interested and that they will not review your application, but they may not just have time to have individual meetings with all of the students. Like each of our programs probably gets over 200 applications. So it's really hard to meet individually. But sometimes you can just shoot faculty an email, ask if they're taking a student in the next year, because for some programs that have several faculty, there might be a program like for right now, I think my program has about 10 faculty, but only about half of us will be able to take a student, right? And so you can ask, are you reviewing applications? Do you plan to take a student next year? That's a question that faculty can answer. But don't take it personally if faculty can't individually meet with you. I think, so with that said, it's also possible, somebody asked just generally, what makes you a competitive applicant for a counseling psych PhD program, right? Because the application is really the most important thing. That's what we all carefully will be reviewing. I think knowing the uniqueness of a counseling psychology PhD, which is, we come from a strength-based discipline, really interested in thinking about prevention, really thinking about multicultural and social justice issues as being really core, researching particular programs to get a sense of the strengths of that program, what their main interest areas are. And really, you're going to hear this probably from all of us, but fit is so important, right? So fit with the particular, most programs, not all, but most programs, if they say they work under an apprenticeship model, it means that then you're applying to work with a specific faculty member. So that faculty member will read your application and, they're looking at, okay, are you a fit for the research that, I have going on in my particular lab? So those things are important. All PhD programs are pretty research oriented. Counseling psychology, it's a scientist practitioner training model. So we really want people who want to integrate science and practice and who really are interested in both research and practice. So that's another thing that I would say. But I'll stop there because I think Dr. Flores maybe had some points as well. But I just want to can't stress enough that please don't take it personally if faculty do not all individually respond to you. But definitely it's important to find out if they're taking a student.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point that I just wanted to underscore. Sending an email is great. Send your CV, introduce yourself, ask, but just don't ask a lot that's going to require a lengthy response from the faculty member, other than if they are admitting a student or not. You're on their radar already just by reaching out. But I think as Joni had mentioned, most faculty just are so overwhelmed with a lot of it, especially faculty from underrepresented groups in higher education. And we've got so much email coming through our inbox on a daily basis, trying to minimize the work, but just get on the radar with your name and introducing yourself and sending your CV and verifying if they're going to pick up a student or not. I think I will hand it off either to Alex or Matt if y'all want to add on to that.
So I'm going to have a response that might, on the face of it, sound contradictory to what Yoni and Lisa had just said. So clearly we receive mostly more emails than we can respond to in depth to the extent that we would want. But what I would say is if you are really interested in connecting with a particular faculty, you're interested in their research, be persistent. Be persistent, and part of the and trust that you can do that in a way that is professional, respectful, but be persistent and indicate, if you can, why it is that you really want to connect with this person. What about their work speaks to you? And part of the reason I'm saying be persistent is so much of our work is about building relationships. Okay? And so if I have a chance to already begin building a relationship, even in the pre-application process, by the time that application comes across my desk, I've already got some investment in learning more about this person. So find the balance. But if there is someone that you really, that if someone's work has touched you, find some way to share that with them in an authentic, genuine way. And I think you'll find that people are going to be responsive. So again, it's not necessarily to contradict, but just to encourage some persistence and perseverance as well.
So I think everyone on the call heard that as show up at Dr. Petersy's door, right? I'm booking a flight now. Can I ask, maybe Alex, can I ask you, so we're getting a lot of questions either at the registration and now, what makes somebody competitive? Dr. Lewis spoke to this a little bit. What if someone is coming from a different discipline or doesn't have a lot of research experience? And I'll say, and then I'll ask Alex maybe if you have thoughts or others. Your application. I do storytelling research. Your application is your narrative and your story, and you can make a very compelling argument or case for your fit with a faculty member's work and the mission, because it's not that there's only one type of thing that prepares you for the work. Lived experience is critical awareness, critical consciousness, demonstrated like commitment to community service. These things are highly valued in the students that we're looking for. So it's not just, I've got a paper with my advisor from undergrad and that's it. If you don't have that, maybe after this webinar, you try to reach out to a research lab near you and try to get some experience that you can begin as a demonstration of your investment in that process. But at the application stage, when I'm reviewing applications, it's really not about have you achieved the levels of somebody who should be really advanced. I want to kind of see the values and the lived experience and the connection with the work that I'm doing. And I see that there's many different ways. I'm looking for a compelling story and someone who's interested in doing meaningful work to make a meaningful impact in society. I'm not looking for somebody who can like crunch out 12 papers in a semester. I mean, that's great. But the work that we do is so, it's complicated and takes investment and commitment of years, not a semester. So we need people who have that kind of heart. And so when I'm reading applications, I'm really looking for that, because in a way that publishing a bunch of papers doesn't necessarily tell me what I need to know in terms of working with people. Alex?
Matt, not much more to add to that, other than just to emphasize that when we're looking at applications, we're trying to get a sense of who this person is. If you have had good enough mentoring, your academics are going to be fine. A mentor won't encourage you to apply to a program if academically you're not going to be competitive. So the academics will take care of themselves. It's now, who is this person? What drives them? And in the context of who is this person, be also thoughtful around who you ask to write letters for you. So you want to ask someone to write a letter who knows you, who can speak to who you are. And so for me, that's the piece. It's finding some way to represent who you are authentically, who you are genuinely. And I would say never write something because you think the other person wants to hear it. Only write something that you want to share because it's important to who you are and it's important to your development. So it's just extending some of your thoughts, Matt.
So I'll add a little bit more to that. I think that in response to the Supreme Court decision last year, I think that there are some institutions, mine included, that are already making some changes in terms of the application process and the information that they are requesting. So, because they're trying to eliminate the possibility of racial bias or racial issues being taken into account during the admissions process. That's why I noted that using your personal statement to address in some way your lived experience with regard to diversity in any way can be an important way to communicate how you might bring that unique perspective to a training program, right? So the other thing that I was going to say is that when I'm looking for applicants, I'm looking for the fit in terms of, does our training program train somebody to meet the goals that you have identified in your personal statement? And are you trainable? I'm not looking for somebody, as Matt had indicated, who has a CV that looks like a student that is about to graduate or an early career professional. I'm not looking for a bunch of publications. I'm looking for experience and an openness to being trained and to learning, and then to also contributing. You're going to be part of a learning environment where the learning doesn't go one way. You're not expected to sit there and be a sponge and just take in the learning from the faculty and information faculty. You're also expected to be engaged in as a graduate student, and faculty and your peers are going to be learning from you, from your own perspectives and experiences and the trainings that you have had prior. So I'm looking for somebody who is trainable and also willing to engage and help others grow from the training and the skills that you are bringing into graduate school.
I also just wanted to add, and then I'll try to also answer another question I know that's in the pipeline too. Because we're really looking for potential, right? Like you don't already have to have it together. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to seek new knowledge and information by obtaining a PhD. So we really want people. We're viewing your applications holistically. For even before during COVID, there was lots of conversations about the GRE, and a lot of programs, took that as an opportunity to just get rid of the GRE completely. Not all programs have permanently done away with the GRE, but for the last few years, I know in our program, we haven't considered the GRE, and we're kind of continuing to think about a long-term plan to get rid of it, because we do know there are racial disparities, right, with the GRE. But with this Supreme Court decision, as Dr. Flores mentioned, more and more programs are now getting more information about how to engage in a more holistic admissions process. So again, we a lot of people, we want to hear about you. I think there was a pre-question about, but how much do I share? I don't want to just share, all of these negative things that have happened to me. And so we don't want you to share something you don't feel comfortable sharing, right? And we don't want, particularly for students of color, it's like, you shouldn't have to, share all your traumas and lay them out on the page. Share what you're comfortable with so that we get to know who you are and your story, as Dr. Miller shared. So, and how your experiences have you've learned from your experiences and how that shaped why you want to pursue a PhD in counseling psychology. That's really what we want to hear about, and connecting your own lived experience to what you're passionate about studying. That's really what we want to hear. But definitely, and we take all those things into consideration. So it's not just about the GRE or not just about the GPA. It's really about the holistic process of your application.
Not speaking for myself, but for my colleagues and panelists, how about shouting out in the chat some appreciation for the wisdom? If I remove myself from the panel, then you've got an excellent group of panelists with lots of decades of wisdom. So thank you very much. Can we? There are more questions that we received about interviewing and applications. Can we? What do you, panelists? What do you think? Did you have think back to when you were applying or whatever? What's your strategy for interviewing? There's usually an individual interview. There are usually group interviews. How do you optimize that experience, and how do you make sure that you're doing it in a way that's fair to your fellow people who are applying? I'll offer one suggestion. This comes from my own experience and interviewing people, especially when you're in group settings. I think it's really important to watch balance and fairness in terms of systems of privilege and oppression that kind of replicate in those group interviews. I've seen people speaking over other people. I've seen people like mansplain in those spaces. I'm not going to lie, I probably did that 20 some years ago. Those things speak volumes to me, and those would be reasons why I would be really concerned about admitting someone. So, it's one thing to write us an amazing statement about your commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity and critical consciousness, but what happens in those interviews is we're watching for all the things, the dynamics, the nonverbals, and how you operate in that space. And if you're, that's an opportunity to kind of lift others up and support them, and to listen, and to take your turn. For those like me who are still trying to unlearn kind of toxic masculinity, it's very easy to fall back into that as a way of operating. And that's something that I would certainly encourage whatever similar kind of oppressive systems that are internalized within you to really think about how can I make sure to really identify them in myself and kind of work those out. Sorry, that was a little bit of a not a happy suggestion, but.
I've got a couple of thoughts about the actual interview day. I often find myself telling applicants, if you've been invited for an interview, it means that we are impressed already. So the interview is not about impressing us. The interview is just about giving us a chance to know who you are, to learn more about you. And in that context, I think there are very few, sometimes applicants will say, what's the right question? What's the right answer to that question? I think there are very few wrong answers to questions. I've had someone say to me, I want to be a counseling psychologist because at the core, I want to help people. Now, that might sound such a simplistic response, but when it's said with honesty, when it's said with depth and authenticity, my response is simply, tell me more. There's something in that response that really, so for me, the bad responses are the dishonest responses. I would never encourage people to do what I did when I went through my interview. I was very naive. I did not know much. I actually did not know much about the program I was applying to. But I was interviewed by my mentor, Dr. Robert Carter. I had just read his book, race and racial identity in psychotherapy. And there was something about racial identity that just, it spoke to my life experience. So I went into the interview and I said, I most really shouldn't be saying this, but why I want to be here is I want to work with you. Your scholarship, what you have written, has helped me in my life. So years later, Robert spoke to me and he said, yeah, I wasn't convinced about that answer, but I thought I'd take a chance. And he is now a wonderful mentor, colleague, and friend. And I credit with just I was who I was. So for what that's worth.
For the record, years ago, Jeannie told me that she really didn't have any other choices, so she was willing to whatever. Similar kind of story.
There's the last question in the chat, I feel like, is a good one. So somebody's asking, how can you ensure your working relationship with a PhD mentor is healthy and trusting? Some folks sometimes drop out of their programs. So, I mean, as we've talked about, like, fit is important with your research interests, but it's also good. The interview process is an opportunity, like Dr. PhD is saying, it's an opportunity for you to get a sense of the person you might be working with and your rapport with them. And, do you feel like personality wise, you guys have similar working styles? Or you can ask those types of questions, right? So when you get interviewed, usually they should leave a few minutes of time for you to ask them questions. Ask about their mentorship style, or how they like to work, and you can get a sense of if that's a style that works for you or if it doesn't work for you. So some of those other things are also really important to think about as well. Some mentors are really hands-off. If you want a really hands-on mentor and the person says, "Oh, I'm pretty hands-off, I want students who are self-directed," then that might not be a good fit for you because you might not get your needs met. So really, thinking about your own working style and what kind of mentor you would like to have, and asking some of those questions during the interview as well.
Yeah, and asking those questions also for their other mentees and advisees, because or other students in the program. What is this person like to work with, to take a class with? What's their history in terms of working with students? Do they have a lot of students that have moved and switched from them? That might be just a sign of patterns that just might be a difficult person to work with. So again, students get some background and supplemental information. It's okay to ask the same question of multiple people in the program, of faculty, of students in different cohorts, to see how consistent the responses are to the questions that you're asking about the program or about the faculty mentor that you are interviewing with. Joni's comment about when you get to the interview stage, at that point, Alex had mentioned this too, you've met the bar of the standards for what they are looking for. They have determined that you're a good fit. Now they're having to select one out of a number of students that they've admitted, but you also are going to be interviewing with multiple programs possibly. You want to interview the programs and get as much information as you need to be able to make the best decision that's going to be a good fit for you.
I'm looking at the time. There are 6 minutes left officially. I'm not sure about. I didn't ask this to the panel, so it's not fair. I have a few minutes after. I can stick around a little bit, but I thought one thing that might be helpful for everyone here, for those of you who are still here and applying, if you can put in the chat. My guess is that people might be anxious, feeling a little insecure, uncertain. My guess is that is a shared experience among the group here. and that you can find a little bit of connection. So if you want to put in the chat kind of how you're feeling about it, whatever feelings or thoughts you have, and I think it might be validating and empowering to see what a shared experience. I remember when I applied, I had no idea what I was doing, and I think there was like one book so 20 years ago there was like literally like one book as a resource, and I never had an opportunity to speak with faculty like this. So certainly I want to normalize and validate those feelings. And part of that is the white supremacy, cis hetero classist kind of world of academia, that it's a real elite space for a select few and only the best get in. And we know that's nonsense. We know that we have a lot to bring and offer to a program, yet it is still difficult to kind of dismantle that internal narrative that we're kind of been socialized into. So we were going to conclude with kind of higher order tips or recommendations from the panelists.
Can we, before we get to that, just answer, there's the quick question about PsyD versus PhD. I think some of the resources that Dr. Miller put in the chat, maybe we could post those again in case anyone came late. But some of those resources might have more information. But the biggest difference is, you're going to do a lot more research in a PhD program than the PsyD program. You're going to get clinical training in both programs, but there is a little bit more heavy emphasis on research in the PhD program versus the PsyD program. So thinking about that, so you could even, look at different programs, look at, the number of credit hours of courses you have to take and other requirements, comparing those might help you. But if you really primarily are interested in being a clinician, you might, consider some of the PsyD programs over a PhD. But often PsyD programs don't have as much funding. So also look at that. So just looking at, the different part of the thing with the PhD, because you're doing research and these other things, often those programs have more funding actually than PsyD programs. So kind of comparing things about cost and the specific training of the program, those are some things to be thinking about. Okay, so on to, what was your question again?
The big tip or recommendation you have given your experience. Can you tell I'm pointing at you, Dr. Lewis, when I go like this?
I was going to let, somebody else share their words of wisdom. But I mean, just some of the same things we reiterated already. See this as an opportunity to find the place that you feel like will be the best fit for you and your own growth and development, and really searching for that place that you think would be a really great fit. Telling that story and that narrative through your materials, making sure it's really clear why you're really interested in getting a PhD in counseling psychology, right? It probably is because you really want to help people, but there's more to it than that, and really showcase and share some of that with us. That's something that I think is really important. And just be yourself. I think there is a lot of performativity that happens in academia, but you do want to find a place where you feel like you can be a piece of your authentic self as well. And so really looking for those programs. And then when you interview, remember, you're also interviewing them, and you're also interviewing the place, and also trying to find a place that's a great fit for you. Dr. Flores, I see you unmuted.
Something that we haven't mentioned that I think is really important is that oftentimes, in one way in which counseling is different from other areas of psychology, is that the route into doctoral programs is often through a master's program. And so if you're considering graduate school, if you're an undergraduate student, consider applying to both master's and doctoral programs in counseling psychology. Don't give up if you don't get admitted the first time. Use a year to gain some additional experiences, to beef up your application. Don't give up. There is a place for each of you in the profession. And reach out and seek advice and guidance from people like us or other graduate students that have already made it to the other side where you want to go, and just get the support along the way. You don't have to do this on your own. And there are a lot of parts of the process, I think, that unless you know somebody who has gone through it, there are invisible aspects of this process that you won't know if you're not seeking advice and support from people who are familiar with the process.
I'm having a thought that is not about great words of advice. I'm thinking how honored I feel to be sharing a platform with Dr. Gioni Lewis, Dr. Matt Miller, and Dr. Lisa Flores. Matt and Gioni and I came up around the same time. Lisa, you were a little ahead of us. Gioni was working with Dr. Helen Neville. I had a professional crush on Dr. Helen Neville. Did fabulous work, and it was so inspiring. Lisa, you most really don't know this. Your work was inspiring to me. You were doing work on acculturation, vocational work, and it meant that there was a place in the field for focus on race and culture. And so to those of you who are interested in coming into the field, you are joining a community. There are folk who are here to support you. Reach out, follow your dream, and find the people who will hold your hand as you're going through that process.
I knew this was going to be a beautiful shared experience. That certainly resonated with me. I feel the same way. I consider it a privilege to be able to send an email to Gioni Lewis and to get a response and not like a auto reply saying sorry. Here's a recommendation I have. If you know the Zoom feature, go to the chat and save chat, because there's a lot of great things in the chat, and including what I'm going to recommend. My big piece of advice is find your people. I'd like to think, the white supremacy academic culture teaches us that we're here because we did it. And we know that's not true. We're here because of our people. And so the sooner you find them, I think the more you can really do this without sacrificing yourself, and in fact, find more of yourself. So what I would encourage you to do for the next couple of minutes is, if you're interested in finding your people and you're not sure where they are, people in this field, enter your email address in the chat, and that is an invitation for anybody else who's applying to reach out to you. And maybe some of you email each other and say hey, how about in 3 weeks, we check in, we schedule a Zoom meeting, and we talk about our statements. Or, hey, let's get, I encourage, you don't have to do that, but that you might, that risk and investment you might find your people, so that in 20 years, you'll be leading a webinar about applying to counseling psychology programs, PhD, and you can reference these other people who did one and they didn't know what they were talking about, but you do now because you and your people have figured it out. So find your people, tell your story. Your application is your story. Own it. It's a powerful story. It's a beautiful story. And if someone's going to read that and they can't see that, then that's not the place for you.